Would you please help me in giving a warm welcome to our keynote speaker this evening, Lori Van Dusen.
You know, we all grow up, I think in school, knowing about Susan B. Anthony, but I was really humbled to learn about some of these things that have been mentioned tonight, but really about what a force of nature she was, how determined, what a visionary. She dedicated her life for the fight for equality and justice, not only for women, but for everyone. Even during her lifetime, she understood that the battle for the fundamental principles of democracy would never end. Freedom, she would remind us, is not a destination, but a difficult and precarious journey that requires unwavering commitment, effective collaboration, and active participation. The never-ending fight for equality and justice, she told us, must transcend race, gender, and faith, because injustice anywhere diminishes freedom for all of us. Her battle cry is as ancient as the Greek Stoics, who told us, "A society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they will never sit." Susan B. Anthony certainly heeded that call, though I can envision her taking out her quill. Does she have a quill? Taking out her quill, making a little edit. "A society grows great when old men and old women plant trees in whose shade they will never sit." That's better. Sadly, as we all know, she did not live to see the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution ratified in the 20th century, and would probably marvel at what women in the 21st century have been able to accomplish as leaders in business, communities, politics. The theme for this year's event, as you've heard, is the power of the purse. It's something she talked about very often. And as a woman in finance, I'm witnessing firsthand what is being called the Great Wealth Transfer. Within 10 years, women are expected to control more than 45% of the world's assets. I think that would blow Susan B. Anthony's mind. She knew that our success would cause us to forget what it took for us to get here. Speaking in front of the National American Suffrage Association on her 74th birthday on February 15, 1894, she said, "We shall someday be heated, and when we shall have our amendment to the Constitution of the United States, everybody will think it was always so, just exactly as many young people believe that all the privileges, all the freedom, all the enjoyments which women now possess always were hers. They have no idea of how every single inch of ground that she stands upon today has been gained by the hard work of a tiny little handful of women in the past." Some little handful of women. This phrase really struck me. Perhaps it's part of Susan B. Anthony's legacy that we sometimes forget. She was reminding us that it doesn't take an army to change the world. It only takes a little handful of committed people. And throughout history, there have been so many of them here in Rochester. Susan B. Anthony was a private citizen, not a president, a military leader, or a high-ranking official. She was simply a citizen that changed the course of history for all of us in this room. Susan B. Anthony called Rochester home. It's where she led the charge for women's suffrage and defied the law, as you heard, by casting her vote in the 1872 presidential election. As a result, she was arrested, tried, and convicted for voting illegally as a woman. She would later describe the event as the greatest judicial outrage history has ever recorded. Never daunted, she would soldier on right here in Rochester, alongside her lifelong friend and collaborator, Frederick Douglass. Their partnership would bridge two great causes: the abolition of slavery and the enfranchisement of women. If there is no struggle, "There is no progress," Douglas once famously said, most consider this statement to be referring to the national struggles like those he and Anthony faced. But there were also personal struggles. Even Douglas and Anthony's deep and enduring friendship was put to the test. There were plenty of challenges. They had different points of view. They argued vehemently, especially over the 15th Amendment. But they worked through it. There was such immense mutual respect between these two committed humans. Even when their agendas competed with one another, which they often did, they worked through their differences and remained united in their collective pursuit of universal equality and justice. Why? Because they both understood intuitively that this was a shared higher calling. In the face of injustice and inequality, a righteous anger called both to action. They knew that the call, freedom for all, was bigger than both of them and could not be achieved alone. This is what bound them together and helped them navigate the treacherous road ahead. Certainly their fortitude, their deep and meaningful collaboration, and their single-minded pursuit of the greater good can serve as a model for all of us today, especially in this polarized climate. Look at everything these two people did from very different worlds together, despite the odds. Whether it's in our neighborhoods, our workplaces, or families, we all have the power to build bridges. We're all stronger together. And this strength is built by recognizing and respecting the humanity in others, even when their struggles differ from our own. It is a lesson for all of us because they chose unity over division, dialogue over demonization, and a shared purpose over personal grievance. In 2023, I published my memoir, Running with Grace, in the hopes of inspiring young professional women. Now, no one told me when I got up here that I would hear myself coming back at me, so this is really a test for public speaking, I think. But when you publish a book, when you write a book and then you're brave enough to publish it, you have to think about who your audience is. And as I was writing, I wasn't thinking I was writing a book, first of all, and secondly, I certainly wasn't thinking about my audience. But it was a healing project for me. And for those of you who may have read the book, you would know that. It was a journaling exercise. But when I got to the end, I heard a voice, and it wasn't my own, saying, "This is a book, you should publish it, and it's not for you." And so I thought, who is this book for? I think it's for anyone, but I thought this could be something meaningful for women, especially professional women or women going through transition, going through loss. Despite amazing progress, there are still significant challenges in the workplace and beyond. The spirit of Susan B. Anthony and our shared home of Rochester certainly informed my stories about growing up here, as well as the themes I chose to explore through the prism of my life. Despite the many generations separating us, I think Susan B. Anthony would have enjoyed reading about what I chose to explore in the book. They're universal principles about shaping our lives one step at a time and realizing there's no limitation we can't conquer if we put our minds to it. Resilience through overcoming adversity, finding your life's purpose are core lessons. But most of all, my book is about finding grace in unexpected places. Purpose is not found overnight. It's built through perseverance, action, and failure, a lot of it. Susan B. Anthony was a woman of strong faith who taught us that grace is found in the act of showing up every day to move our lives forward in a meaningful way. If we all take care of our little corner of the planet and the people in it, this will have a positive impact on the world. Some call it the butterfly effect. I think Susan B. Anthony probably just called it Monday. She knew that no one could change the world in a day, but with conviction and determination, she would change the world for the better over time. In fact, as you heard, it was 50 years of fighting for women's suffrage, Her focus was unwavering. One petition, one speech, one vote. It all mattered. Every single step, no matter how big or small, it always was about progress, even though others might have thought it was failure. She saw failure as progress where others saw it as defeat. That resonates with me deeply. Through those consistent, incremental actions, she ignited a nationwide movement. She taught us that the way to push back against chaos is not through grand gestures, but through intentional daily steps. Show up and actively participate was her simple call to action. Step off the bleachers and onto the field, she enjoined. Come and do what is right and good, so the world continues to evolve towards the light instead of darkness. She showed us that this is how we find our life's purpose in small, everyday moments. She taught us that grace is found in doing what we can, even when the path ahead is unclear or filled with challenges. I believe this purpose-driven, can-do spirit, born of Rochester's earliest residents and strengthened by Anthony's unwavering fight for equality and justice, created a strong foundation for our city's rise and an amazing culture of innovation. She worked tirelessly to lift a huge portion of Rochester's population, its women. She fought for their empowerment and independence. In addition to her work on voting and land rights, she led a campaign to admit women to the University of Rochester, raising $50,000 in pledges, including pledging her own life insurance policy. By the way, it's $50,000. That's somewhat coincidental with what we're trying to raise tonight. So, ultimately, the Rochester Council of Women, which Anthony supported, was established in 1899 and helped secure women's admission to the University of Rochester. She also helped women get elected to the local school board and saw the first woman elected to public office in Rochester in 1899. Anthony was one of the founding members of the Rochester Women's Education and Industrial Union, WEIU, which was established in 1893. At the first meeting, Anthony expressed outrage about the news of a local woman being jailed after fainting in the street simply because she had no place to go. The WEIU was known for a number of reforms and successes. They assisted in Nellie McElroy being hired as the first policewoman in Rochester. They introduced manual training and sewing into schools. Anthony encouraged women to become teachers, lawyers, and doctors. By the way, Elizabeth Blackwell was the first woman in the United States to earn a medical degree, and she graduated from the Geneva Medical College in Geneva, New York in 1849. She had a shared advocacy for women's advancement. While Blackwell's primary goal was medicine, I didn't think it was a coincidence that her journey unfolded between Rochester and Seneca Falls, New York. Anthony's progressive energy was also directed towards elevating nursing as a profession during the Civil War. She supported the transformative work of Dorothea Dix and Claire Barton in their pursuit to make nursing a way of life for women to achieve financial independence. These early working women helped shape Rochester's vibrant and innovative economy, and Susan B. Anthony played a very important role in making that happen. Even during Anthony's lifetime, the city experienced tremendous growth and technological discoveries. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Rochester, New York, emerged as a significant center for innovation and industry, drawing parallels to the modern-day Silicon Valley. Our city's growth was propelled by its strategic location on the Erie Canal, facilitating trade and a diverse workforce. World-renowned companies were being built here. To name a few, Bausch & Lomb opened in 1853, Eastman Kodak in 1892, Western Union Telegraph in 1856, Gleason Works in 1865, and RT French Company in 1884. All released breakthrough technologies in their industries. Into the next centuries, many more transformative companies were launched here. But I can't skip Xerox because it was formative to me. Xerox Corporation, formerly Haloid, was founded in Rochester in 1906. My first job, after finishing my Master of Education at Harvard, was selling copiers for them. I was in my early 20s. And Xerox had one of the best training programs, sales training programs in the country. I have to go off script for a minute. This won't be too long, but I just have to tell you this. I was raised here in Rochester by a divorced single mother. I'm a twin, and our big Italian family on my mother's side encouraged me and my brother, who's here tonight, to just do our best, to work hard, but they embraced education. I had no idea ever that I didn't belong anywhere. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. I'm sorry, Scott, you were right after me, but I was a little bit before you. We were raised by the best family. I mean, they were completely, they didn't see in categories. And I had no idea what a blessing that was. So my grandfather, here I went to college. I thought I was going to be a musician, side note, dropped out of the music program, ended up with different degrees, went to Harvard, still didn't know what I wanted to do for a living. And my grandfather said, go to Xerox. And my grandmother said, it's close to home. So here I land at Xerox. I'm in my early 20s. What I didn't realize at the time, because I really was clueless, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I was clueless. I just didn't realize that Xerox was way ahead of its time in promoting women and supporting diversity. Anthony's fingerprints can definitely be seen here. In fact, Joseph C. Wilson, the first CEO of Xerox Corporation, was deeply influenced by the legacies of Douglas and Anthony. He was born and raised in Rochester, and his personal values and leadership approach influenced Xerox's corporate culture, and there are no accidents about this. The whole story of my time at Xerox is in my book, but I'll give you a little tiny bit of it. It's in the 80s, and my first job is to drive. Does anybody know what a K car is? They're like station wagons, and well, you know what a K car is now. So I'm in my suit and heels in Rochester weather, taking big, bulky copiers out of the trunk of my car and bringing them into businesses. I had a Harvard degree, went to college before that, but I was taught, like, you do what it takes. Just do what it takes. So what I figured out was that if I was successful, Xerox's approach was to put you in even more difficult situations. So that meant that ultimately I was selling the largest copiers that would take up a small room to printing companies. Now, you're not laughing because some of you are a lot younger than me, but back then, selling photocopiers to printers was akin to putting them out of business. So I became one of the top sales reps that year. I guess it worked. I gained a lot of confidence and a lot of strength from carrying copiers around. I think Susan B. Anthony would have been proud of my dedication, determination, but more importantly, the power of the purse, because I was successful, I saved a little money, and I could move on to my next job, which ultimately became my career. My grandfather also influenced this, because when I was 7 years old, he used to sit, he was a man with an 8th grade education, he was a small businessman, and he would have annual reports of companies, and he'd share them with me. I'm 7, and he would say, what do you think? So that's really how I ended up on Wall Street. I thought, okay, I went to college, I have a Harvard degree, I went to sales training, did pretty well at one of the best corporations in the world, I have a little bit of money, I'm going to research where the best training programs are on Wall Street, and it happened to be Shearson Lehman Brothers. So I said, oh, I'll apply there. So I walked in, I think they were probably horrified, but I passed all the tests, and I have said this many times, it was such a blessing that I started in a quantitative business. Side note, my mother, Alice, was the family's controller. She was the financial person in our small business. And she told me a story when I was little, and I asked her about it a few years ago before she died. And she told me she would have to sign her correspondence A. Van Dusen, her name was Alice, because if people knew she was a woman, they wouldn't do business with our family's company. So that really stuck with me, and here I am. I mean, my grandfather was a really smart guy. He took his daughter, he put her in a position of being a controller in a business, but knew it was too early to encourage her to do what I did. So here I go to Shearson Lehman Brothers. I pass all the tests, they hire me, they have to hire me. And I'm on my office, my cubicle is on the 107th floor of the World Trade Center South Tower. That was my first day. I walk in to this cubicle-laden space, looking at the enormous floor-to-ceiling windows, looking across the Manhattan skyline. It was a clear day, and I could see the Statue of Liberty all the way across the Hudson. It was surreal. This was 1986. Wall Street was on fire, but it was hardly a supportive environment for young women. In fact, I was one of 2 women in my training class I tried to fact check this, so please tell me if I'm wrong, I'm sure I'll hear about it, but I think it was about 200 people in the class, and there were 2 women, and after 3 years, I was at the top of my class, and the only woman. But thanks to Susan B. Anthony and the hard work of some little handful of women and my grandfather, I had no idea that I really didn't belong there, because I did. 100 years earlier, Susan B. Anthony had paved my way for education and financial independence. My biggest advantage always was this unstoppable determination to prove my worth, outwork anyone, and break barriers. I didn't think I was special. I didn't think I didn't belong. I just worked. There's your desk. Here's your phone. Was basically the only guidance I received on my first day. And by the way, I had a $24,000 draw, which meant I had to pay the company back if I didn't make that much money in a year. But call by call, I built relationships and signed clients. I kept to myself, I did it my way, and I just stayed true to what I believed. And a side note, the power of a purse is a real thing. You can have a lot of conviction, but when it's aligned with having the power of a purse, it's powerful. You can take on fights. You can use Susan B. Anthony as a model without compromise. And during my decades on Wall Street, I would face a lot of challenges and a lot of adventures. It was a roller coaster ride. I would come face to face with the powers that be. I would have the distinct honor of working alongside CEO Jamie Dimon and becoming a managing director in the company. So they didn't really think about women. They just did what they did. I was one of the top producers, and I would go on these trips. And one day, I was at some trip somewhere with Jamie Dimon, and he asked me to go on a run. I was on a little internal board of directors, and I said, sure, I'll go with you. And I was 6 months pregnant, and I had a heart monitor on, and my husband was next to me on a bicycle because he was worried I was going to go a little bit too fast. And Jamie asked me, why aren't there more women in this industry? And I said, well, Jamie, for starters, you treat maternity like a short-term disability. Now, it was true. It was a short-term disability to have a child. And excuse me for this phrase, but I said it. I said, Jamie, I don't have a dog in this race anymore. This is my second kid. This is going to be my last kid. And I think you need to put a maternity policy in place. He said, what are you talking about? We have that. And I said, no, we don't. And so he said, well, we're going to change that. And because of my experience at Xerox, I ended up helping. I didn't do much other than create awareness, but pointed to Xerox maternity policy, and it got adopted there and at all the other Wall Street firms. So kind of off script, really off script here, but I would say this to those of you that feel disappointed and angry about some of the things that have happened in the world. and in the United States around women's rights. Some of it, what I learned in my life is that sometimes what we see as discrimination is a real lack of understanding. And if you don't give up and you show people by example and you do the things that Douglas and Anthony did, stayed friends, worked through it one step at a time, you can change things. I was shocked that no one had ever thought about it before. I also talk about in the book that I had some other dubious honors, like facing off against the infamous Bernie Madoff. About 10 years before he was discovered to be running a giant Ponzi scheme, I got thrown out of his office, found myself on the street in Manhattan, really mad, but I knew his numbers were wrong. I didn't know he was running a giant $65 billion Ponzi scheme, but I knew something was off, and I stood up for myself. It's all in the book. But I think about, the chutzpah to do that. Would it have been possible without the hard work of Susan B. Anthony? I don't think so. I don't. All of these things are connected. And as it was said, history moves forward and back, and you have to keep fighting for the things that you think are right. So I had built confidence. I fought conflicts of interest. And as the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. But that wasn't what I was seeing on Wall Street. For every person who did embrace responsibility, like Jamie, there were two others who didn't. So I formed my own firm. I decided to go independent. And at the time, I didn't realize that I was standing on the shoulders of someone as large as Susan B. Anthony. But as I look back now, I realize that if I was born even 5 years before I was, none of this might have been possible. Her vision unfolded slowly over time because of her movement's continuous push for progress. Without the foundation she built, there's no chance I would have had the opportunity to carve out a place on Wall Street. I had some fun imagining what it would be like if Susan B. was running a financial firm in the early days of Wall Street. I have no doubt she would have had the place straightened out ethically and diversified the ranks in no time. She wasn't driven by her ego, as so many were. She was driven by her convictions, her moral courage, and her strategic persistence. Her fight for fairness and integrity deeply resonates with me. I distrust those people who know so well what God wants them to do, Anthony once said, because I notice it always coincides with what their own desires are. She called a spade and would have used the power of the press to make her case, just as she had during the suffrage years. And when the insults started flying, which they inevitably would, she would deflect them with her signature sense of humor. A week before Susan B. Anthony's death in 1906, the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle published a lengthy piece by suffragette journalist Rita Child Dorr. Dorr emphasized Anthony's resilience, crediting her keen sense of humor as a shield against relentless criticism. As an example of her wit, the article recalled Anthony's response to a newspaper editor who mocked her appearance, writing that she blew into town yesterday wearing a bonnet that looked as if it belonged to Methuselah's youngest daughter. Anthony quipped in return, if I had a vote and he wanted it, he wouldn't care if I looked like Methuselah's oldest daughter. I could have used her humor and her quick wit around me as I decided to leave Wall Street to become an advocate for the independent financial advisory movement. This client-first approach was the change I thought the financial industry needed. So I took the leap and I went independent. My courage was almost immediately met with a lawsuit from Citigroup, which had absorbed Shearson through a series of acquisitions and had become the largest bank in the world at the time. This was August 31st, 2008. It was a David versus Goliath moment. I'd done nothing wrong, but I remember telling my husband, Ron, we're probably going to lose everything. Luckily, we'd moved back to Rochester to raise our 2 boys. I'd been commuting to Manhattan for several years, so I had a strong support network around me in my hometown when everything fell apart. In the end, against all odds, I would win the lawsuit against Citigroup and open my own independent financial advisory firm. LVW Advisors, right here in Rochester. In many ways, my life had come full circle. Tonight, I'm privileged to enjoy this special evening with a diverse audience of Rochesterians, including the LVW team over there, my twin brother, who I pointed out. Thank you all for coming together to celebrate Susan B. Anthony's life and the wonderful National Susan B. Anthony Museum and House that keeps her legacy alive for all of us. As we celebrate, it's time to remember to not forget what it took to get here. A vital part of the progress is financial support, the power of the purse. And as Deborah said, I think you said, it will take $25 million for the National Susan B. Anthony Museum and House to bring this vision alive. She did mention that we've raised $16 million. So the plan is to expand the capacity from 13,000 visitors annually to 100,000. What better tribute is there to this amazing woman and our city than to drive action and awareness by educating and supporting an incredible state-of-the-art 21st century interpretive center for important issues, including the things that she really deeply cared about: voting rights, pay equity, human trafficking, access to education, substance abuse, abolition, and nursing as a profession. Susan B. Anthony spent her life fighting for all of these things, and I ask you to bring her wisdom to future generations by supporting this vision. We must never forget the many decades of hard and exhausting work done by Anthony and her little group of women. They have made tonight's celebration possible. This gathering is a testament to her vision. We are her legacy. Every vote we cast strengthens democracy. Every act of kindness, empathy, and generosity helps shape a stronger, more just Rochester. Every step towards justice and equality that we take collectively is proof that their work mattered and their immense sacrifices paid off. The museum is a Rochester treasure, but is most importantly a testament to her relentless pursuit of progress, ensuring that her fight for equality continues to inspire and shape future generations. We may be planting trees in whose shade we will never sit. We have always been a city of trailblazers, and Rochester's legacy as a beacon of justice and progress is not to be taken for granted. Susan B. Anthony reminded us greatness is not something we inherit. It's something we nurture and we build together a little every day. My hope is that my talk this evening may have placed a responsibility on your hearts, one that causes you to act as a little handful of people that can make a difference by supporting this historical institution and education center. Susan B. Anthony was unwavering in her belief that failure is impossible, and we will not fail her. We've already raised the $16 million towards this goal. Failure is not an option. The stakes are too high. As a city, a state, and a nation, we have the opportunity to do what is right for the greater good, just as Susan B. Anthony did. If we summon the same courage, conviction, and grace, we're all part of a shared narrative and legacy. Thank you for listening tonight. I'm so grateful to have the honor to help carry her vision forward with you tonight.